Christopher Weston Chandler. To many, he is the first person that is thought of when one speaks of the word lolcow. Indeed, the rabbit hole referred to as the Chris Saga is a rabbit hole that runs deep. Many are interested in the world of Chris, what he does, why he does them. Even if you took the world's best psychiatrists and had them research the mind of this being, it would take centuries to figure out how Chris's mind worked and functioned. I'm very interested in how the world reacts to Chris, the side characters, one would say. From the dean of CWCki, Mary Lee Walsh, to the game shop manager Michael Snyder, all the way to Cole Smithy, Chris's half-brother, and of course, Chris's own father, Robert Franklin Chandler Jr. Bob Chandler has a very mixed reputation among Chris Chan enthusiasts. Even the CWCki paints him in a more negative light. This video aims to create a clearer image of him. I am using the CWCki for this video, so if this video seems similar to that page, that's why. Bob was born in Fort Worth, Texas, as the first and only child of Robert Franklin Chandler Sr. and Jean Holloman. He was raised in Sylacauga, Alabama, and spent his childhood in poverty, but grew his interest in the world very early on. He collected various foreign stamps in his childhood, and as he grew up, would amass a collection of 15,000 to 20,000 foreign long plays. A yearbook in 1942 lists Bobby in the freshman class, suggesting he may have graduated in 1945. He then went on to enroll in Auburn University in aeronautical engineering. In 1946, he would be conscripted into the U.S. military and would be placed into the Signal Corps. In his training, he'd learn how to install valve systems, switchboards, and telephones. He would then be sent to Korea in 1948, where he would help to install infrastructure there. He also received the World War II Victory Medal. As per the GI Bill, Bob could easily further his education, which he did. He chose to go to Jacksonville State Engineers College as he didn't want to get swallowed up at a bigger one. He studied pre-engineering for 2 years and even played in a band there, before returning to Auburn, joining Phi Mu Alpha, a social frat for men interested in music. When Bob finished his education, he would work for Western Engineering for 40 years. He'd also work at General Electric in upstate New York, being responsible for 7 patents. He would go on to create or help create an automated steel mill for cars, a paper mill to produce Kleenex, warehouses, railroads, and tanker ships. He's even been acknowledged as a large contributor to the plastic molding industry. In 1956, Bob would marry Patricia Harley. They would have 2 children before divorcing. Very little is known about this marriage, so not much can be said about it, despite theories of abuse and neglect. They separated in 1976 and finally divorced in 1980. Only a few months after, Bob married Barbara Ann Weston. His relationship with his stepson, Cole Smithy, was strained, but again, not much can be said about this. Finally, on February 24, 1982, Kristen Chandler was born. Because Chris was born as his father was in his mid-50s, it's no wonder why he is the way he, well, is. Typically, children get defects when they are born to people who are very much on the older side. Bob encouraged Chris to share his interests and hobbies. He encouraged him to learn more about the world and tried to get him into engineering, even converting a shed in his backyard into a workshop where he and Chris could build things together. Chris even seemed to show interest in stamps, going as far as to fill a few pages in his personal stamp book. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for Chris and Bob though. Chris's fear of the male genitalia stems from Bobby himself. He had a habit of sleeping with nothing from the waist down, so when Chris barged in on him, well, it scared him. Chris has also complained about his father just being an awful person to deal with. Well, my father is a major stressor against me, starts arguments, annoys me. Many Christorians agree that this quote simply stems from Bob just trying to give Chris some constructive criticism. Bob is thought by the lolcow community as the one who actively kept Chris in check, a level-headed individual who kept an unstable family from breaking down. This is evidenced in one of the most prominent moments in Christory, where he confronts Chris about his activities online.
Then get out of here, off that internet.
Fine.
What is your trouble?
I'm not going to kill myself.
Get away from that TV.
Fine.
Get away from the internet. I'm cutting it down right now.
No! Dad, no!
A true internet lumberjack. However, he too had his moments. He seems to believe that Chris is constantly harassed via a network of trolls spanning across the entire world simply because of the success that he enjoys from his Sonichu comics. He even tried to defend Chris's actions in the Matthew Noble call, stating that the Game Shop employees weren't any better, accusing them of having taken funds from Chris's checking account. Many use this call as proof, proving that Bob is just as delusional as Chris. Bob also pampered Chris, and despite having put his foot down and holding him accountable for many things, he mishandled other situations, the effects of which are still being felt by the Chandler household today. When Bob and Barbara trusted Chris with a credit card, for some reason, he ended up owing $3,500 in credit. Most parents in this situation would simply look on, let their child dig themselves out of the hole that they dug for themselves. Bob, however, footed the bill. At this point, Bob would be forced to monitor Chris's spending. Chris, however, went behind his parents' back and acquired 2 MasterCards from Best Buy, which he would also max out. Bob again paid him off and only gave him allowances in the form of Visa gift cards until he died. In hindsight, this was not the right thing to do. Chris got himself into debt, and Dad had to bail him out for a problem that he should have just let happen. It could have been a valuable learning experience for Chris. However, it has only furthered his financial irresponsibility, something which is prominent even today, as Chris is hopelessly in debt and is making little effort to get out. After retirement, Bob lived off of Social Security and his General Electric pension. As he found himself often stuck at home, he enjoyed speaking to anyone he could, even trolls and prank callers. In fact, much of what we know of Bob comes from conversations with trolls. Robert Simmons, someone who was able to personally meet him, said he was a really pleasant guy. Other than that, he would often spend his days in the greenhouse, on a swing, rocking along to his record player. Bob would suffer from 2 triple bypasses and 4 heart attacks, and would need to wear an artificial pacemaker for the rest of his life. Fluid built up in his legs, signifying that he had chronic heart failure. Despite this, he continued to eat at Burger King daily. On March 1st, 2010, Chris reported that Bob had been hospitalized. Realizing the severity of the situation, those with a vested interest in Chris, from his most loyal of white knights to the most depraved of trolls, had nothing but the best of wishes for him. What happened between March 1st, 2010 to September 2011 is not well known. Chris made little mention of him, only stating that Bob was doing good. This is when Chris's cross-dressing and tomgirl phase reared its ugly head around the corner. Bob would only live to see the beginning of this, however. On September 6, 2011, Bob had died, surrounded by friends, family, and his pastor. Even Cole, who showed nothing but contempt for him, allegedly showed remorse upon hearing news of his death. It was an interesting life I had. Bob Chandler, at peace. Bob had left a letter for Chris, which was first written in 1987, when Chris was only 5 years old. The letter is much too long for this video, but I strongly suggest it be read. A link to the letters, along with a link of some voiceovers of the letter, will be left in the description. The letter was written because Bob feared he'd die before ever getting to share important feelings, dreams, and things with Chris at an age that he'd understand. The reason for this open letter to you, which will grow as time goes on, is that I know now that I, at best, haven't much time left to share myself with you. Particularly to share my things, my dreams, and my thoughts with you at a time in the future when you will be able to understand. Remember to use my things and carry on my dreams if you want to. In the letter, Bob talks about his hardships growing up and gives Chris some advice. Just remember, there are many sides to a mountain and many ways to climb it. If you get stopped, back off, regroup, and try another way. If you are still not successful, maybe it is not meant to be. Accept it as experience and go after something else for a while. If it is meant to be, Having it on the back burner simmering for a while is not bad. It will pop up again, and the way to attain it will be there. He also writes down all the things he intends for Chris to inherit. He instructs Chris to learn the value of what he receives, how they may be enjoyed, and how it may be destroyed. Fitting, since at the time of Chris receiving the letter, value was something that he couldn't comprehend. I hope that you will not carelessly misuse, waste, or destroy the value of the many things that I have collected for you. Do not be in such a hurry to use, play, or work with these things. First, learn all about them, how to use them, and how to enjoy them, their value, and how you can thoughtlessly waste their value, and then enjoy them as I have. Bob also revealed in a letter written in August 2008 that he had faith in Sonichu. At this time in life, you and Sonichu need a quest and purpose in life. Let Sonichu become a champion for autistic persons everywhere and continually defeat the perils of autism. Sonichu could become the spokesperson for autistic persons with an ongoing fight for them in chapter after chapter, or good deeds on the internet. He could become the spokesperson from now on. You and Sonichu could become famous worldwide. It's a shame then that the Chris Chan wiki blatantly misrepresents these letters. These letters, intended for Bob to share his stories with Chris and teach him things beyond the grave, as well as show faith and confidence in him and Sonichu, is twisted into implying that Bob had more malicious intentions with these letters. Bob is seen as a vastly better parent than Barb, and there's really no argument there. Barb is a hoarder, manipulator, and kept Chris on too loose of a leash. Bob could be said to be the opposite. He wanted to clean out the house, which Barb actually threatened to kill herself over if he did so. He also tried to get Chris to live an independent life, but at the same time, he'd stop Chris from doing anything too Chrissy. Many sympathize with Bob, raising a child in an age where autism wasn't very well understood, at a very old age at that, trying to connect with him, getting him into a college, and leaving behind money for his family to keep them on their feet until they could find a more reliable source of revenue, which would ultimately be squandered after his death. When you look at the surface, Bob seems to be a normal, level-headed parent. He tried to be a positive influence on his son, but ultimately, his son just didn't see eye to eye with him. It could even be said that Chris could have been a little more normal if Bob were alive today. Perhaps he could have stopped Chris from plugging in the coffee machine into the bathroom outlet, which led to the house burning down. Perhaps he wouldn't be banned from every single GameStop in his city. Maybe, just maybe, he could have stopped the Troon saga. However, many Christorians look upon Bob in a less positive manner, many stating that while he is better than Barbara, he still wasn't a good parent. A very damning piece of evidence against Bob is the Matthew Noble phone call. In this call, a troll who went by the name of Alec Benson Leary, posing as Gameplace employee Matthew Noble, discussed the events of June 4th, 2010, where Chris tried to take a picture of Matthew Snyder, which wasn't taken too well by the customers. Surprisingly, Bob defended Chris's actions. He also said some very interesting things.
That's what I call time
People are harassing him from all over the world. Let me tell you something, fella. You know what some damn crazy fools that I think started at your store with Megan and Mike and 2 or 3 more? You know what they just did a week ago? They just broke into his checking account, got his checking account numbers and routing numbers. They broke into his Best Buy MasterCard number, and they stole his ID and all of his password information. They went into that Best Buy checking account, trying to ruin his credit, and made a payoff on a check that had no funds in the checking account, which got him a whole bunch of non-sufficient fund fees.
That's only scratching the surface of the call. There's a lot more to the call itself, and there's a lot more to the gameplace and the events that happened there. If you want the full audio, I'll put a link to it in the description. A lot of people use this call as proof that Bob is delusional and that he could have fueled the mindset that Chris has now. He also refused to move Chris to a special school, going as far as to take legal action against the school trying to get him moved. When this failed, his family moved. This could have drastically improved Chris as a person should he actually have went to this special school. He might not be where he is today if he had just gotten the help that he needed. It's also been said that Bob was racist and homophobic, and these ideas made their way into Chris's head. "I've seen crosses burning, fella. I've seen them, and you don't want to see it." A quote many use to suggest that he may have been in or had connections to the Ku Klux Klan. He's also made a few mildly racist jokes, such as the joke with Barack Obama painting the White House black. Today, however, many Christorians don't believe he was a Klansman or racist. Keep in mind that Chris is an internet user, and he goes to places like Encyclopedia Dramatica. He also watched shows like The Boondocks and Adult Swim, the satire of which he takes at face value. It could be said that he harbored ideas of homophobia, which he likely did.
Now, Mike and Megan are the ones that conspired together with a couple of other people, kids there I think were gay, to persecute and torment Christian for years.
And of course, as I've said before, he definitely could have held Chris more accountable for his actions. Whenever Chris did something wrong, Bob would either take the fall or blame the people around Chris instead of holding him responsible, which has definitely influenced Chris's attitudes today. So, was Bob a good parent? Well, if you're asking me, I wouldn't say that he was a bad parent. I want to emphasize what happened after Bob's death. Chris now cross-dresses publicly. He burned down his own house because he plugged a coffee machine into a bathroom outlet. He is hopelessly in debt and is making no attempt to get out, instead of relying on the dimensional merge that will give him the wealth he needs to pay said debts off. He narrowly avoided jail time twice, and I ask you, if Bob was alive, would this have happened? I don't think so. Before his death, Chris certainly didn't act normal, but the level of harm done to other people was, fairly minimal. And for the most part, he kept himself out of trouble. For the most part. After Bob's death, well, he's just screwing up left and right, since Barb doesn't even try to keep him in check. I also believe that Bob's mishandlings with his autistic child is understandable. We have the power of hindsight. We know more about autism now than they did in the 80s and 90s. In fact, Bob's fears of moving Chris to a special needs school wouldn't be completely unfounded. One need only look at Willowbrook State School in 1987, which gives the impression that these places are merely locations where people dump special needs children and they could just be out of sight and out of mind. Unfortunately, Bob was a product of his time, which meant that his opinions towards homosexuality were quite negative. It's unfortunate that he influenced Chris to also think of them negatively, but I don't think it should be held against him. After all, I don't think it's uncommon for parents to influence their kids with backwards views. He's not necessarily unique in this circumstance, it's just a problem that's unavoidable. In fact, you too will be subject to the scrutiny of hindsight, just as Bob is today. Think of the opinions you hold right now. Abortion, guns, religion. In the future, you will either be praised or ridiculed for your beliefs. I do believe it's right to criticize Bob for filling Chris's head with these weird and zany conspiracy theories he's invented, especially in the Matthew Noble call. Because of them, it's likely that Chris believes he can actually do no wrong, and he does awful things because of this. I don't think that Bob is entirely to blame for this problem though. I mean, after all, the dude's old. He's 80 years old, and at that age, your mental health just takes a huge toll. It's also apparent that he doesn't understand much of what Chris gets involved in. And keep in mind, he's all but isolated from society, his only company being a deranged wife and Chris. Hell, when it comes down to it, the man just loves his child. Can you really fault him for that? Maybe take that into account before you make an 8-minute rant against a tired, old, and near-death man.
What the f*** is wrong with you people?
At some points, Bob was willing to stand up to Chris. Other times, he took the blows. Even though he should have let Chris bear responsibility, I respect his ability to do both. In most instances, he just tried to look out for his son. Sometimes in the right way, sometimes in the wrong. And he had faith in his child, even when the internet collectively laughed at Chris. He wanted his child, despite the hurdles, to make something of himself. He was proud of what limited things he accomplished. You can't say, at the very least, that Bob didn't try. Plus, there were factors outside of Bob's control. For instance, Chris is Chris. He's a loose cannon. You can tell him to do something, but whether he'll do it right or at all is anyone's guess. He tried to instill some good qualities into Chris, but in the end, he just couldn't get through to him. And then there's Barbara. People say that Chris is a victim of his parents. I don't really agree with that statement at all. Bob can at least prove himself to be a good influence on Christian at times, but little good can be said of Barbara. She is understood by the lolcow community to be unstable, selfish, narcissistic, a pathological liar, and hoarder. Chris is a victim, but it's not a victim of his parents, just Barbara. Bob's negative qualities instilled into Chris are just unintentional side effects. Barbara knowingly and regularly performs these frankly messed up antics on Chris. Also note, we don't know much about Bob. We are able to examine Chris and Barbara so thoroughly because we know so much about them. I mean, Chris has a wiki dedicated to him, for God's sake. Bob? Much of what we know about him is left to interpretation. We just don't know much about him. It's hard to draw a decisive conclusion from Bob as a parent or even as a person. Who knows? He could be better than we think, or much, much worse. At the end of it all, considering everything, I think that Bob Chandler is a good parent. If you don't agree with me, I think at the very least, you probably agree with me when I say that he was respectable as a parent. After all, he put a lot of work and effort into Chris. 28 years of trying to sculpt this person into being a worthy individual for society. Yeah, there's a lot of things that he should have done or shouldn't have done at all, but you know what? That's just parenting. Parents make mistakes. I really do think that Bob, if Bob were here with me today, he would agree with me that he made his fair share of mistakes, and yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, pour yourself a drink. Water, Kool-Aid, soda, beer, rum, whiskey, anything you have on hand. Let us raise our glasses to this man. He may not have been the best father, or even a good father, hell, maybe not even the father that Chris should have had, but let us commend his efforts anyways, despite his mistakes and mishaps. Here's to you, Internet Lumberjack, Robert Franklin Chandler Jr. September 4th, 1927 to September 6th, 2011.